Bibliophiles of the internet. Today I thought I would share some short Halloween reads. If you're anything like me, you might want to read something appropriately dark or magical or vibey to celebrate Halloween, but you don't have time to start and finish an entire book before the month ends. That's why I often turn to graphic novels and short works. So those are the only two categories I'm covering in this recommendations video. Everything is either less than 200 pages or something that can feasibly be completed within a few hours. There's something for everyone. There's a whole range of things from cute all ages content to super dark messed up content depending on what you're looking for. So let's get into it. Starting with graphic novels, my first choice is a bit off center from the prompt, but I think it works, and that is North Ranger by Ray Terciero and Brie Indigo. This will make sense, just give me a second. This is a queer YA graphic novel that blends together young romance and gothic sensibilities. It's a modern day retelling of Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey, and it's about a teenager named Cade whose family sends him to spend the summer working on a ranch. Cade is a horror movie obsessed introvert who does not do well with early mornings and manual labor, but the upside is that there's a pair of twins at the ranch around his age, one of whom is the ruggedly handsome and enigmatic Henry, who might just have his own secrets. Yes, a great deal of this story is about coming of age, it's about teenage romance, but there's also a dark side to the story. Like I said, Cade is obsessed with horror movies, and so he often views the world through that lens. And the creators have found ways to infuse tension and suspense throughout the story, especially through the tone and the artwork in ways that you might not expect. On the complete other end of the spectrum, we also have Let Me Out by Emmett Nahill and George Williams. This is a dark, queer horror story set against the backdrop of the Satanic Panic in the late 70s. It's set in the suburbs of New Jersey where a pastor's wife is found brutally murdered, and when the FBI picks up the case, they start searching for scapegoats to cover up their own seemingly connected crimes. The scapegoats in question are a group of 4 queer punk friends who are not only trying to clear their names, but also find themselves in the midst of a deal with the devil himself. This is a super dark and twisted comic, very bloody, very graphic, but it's also an interesting occult adventure that explores issues of governmental corruption and injustice. There's a lovable group of queer outcasts who are grossly misunderstood, but still fighting to live their lives, even if it means going up against horrific, demonic powers, which is kind of badass. A graphic novel I actually read myself on Halloween a couple of years ago was Over My Dead Body by Sweeney Boo. Yes, that is actually the author's name. This is a witchy, magical school kind of story. It takes place in a magic school hidden deep in a dark forest, and the main character, Abby, has just had one of her closest friends and classmates go missing. The teachers and her peers say not to worry, the coven will find her, everything is under control. But soon, Abby's search for answers will steer her towards the off-limits forest surrounding the academy as she learns that her friend's disappearance might be connected with a string of past disappearances. I enjoyed this when I read it. It really makes great use of color and composition especially to convey that dark, magical feeling that any good magical school story should have. It's got mystery, it's got suspense, it's got a ragtag group of young witches taking a dangerous investigation into their own hands, so if you enjoy those things, this would be a great choice. My next pick is, again, a little more unexpected, but still definitely worth mentioning, and that is Destroyer by Victor LaValle and Dietrich Smith. This is a futuristic sci-fi spin on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It's about a version of the monster known as the Destroyer who teams up with a scientist called Dr. Baker who tragically lost her son after a fatal encounter with the police. And they basically team up to exact their wrathful vengeance. It's been a while since I read this one, so I don't remember the finer details, but I do remember enjoying it for its refreshing take on a classic horror story and for being able to use that classic framework to explore modern day issues. There's action, there's intrigue, there's heartbreak. Victor LaValle is a tremendous writer in any medium, so it's no surprise that his talent extends to comics. Next is The Dire Days of Willowweep Manor by Shannon K. Garrity and Christopher Baldwin. This is a YA graphic novel that's equal parts gothic and humorous about a girl named Haley whose greatest passion in life is gothic romance novels, but she actually ends up in one when she's transported to another universe. She ends up in this dark, stately manor that has all the usual trappings from one of her favorite stories, but she's realizing that the romantic exterior hides the workings of a sinister pocket universe. I love a good alternate universe, alternate timeline story. This also seems like the kind of graphic novel that's very meta, very self-aware, kind of poking fun at the familiar landmarks of the genre it finds itself in, with an unlikely heroine at the helm, and it just sounds like a good time. I also know that Taproot by Keezy Young comes very highly recommended. This is described as a soft and heartfelt, queer paranormal story about Blue, who is in love with his best friend. However, he himself is dead. The good news is that his best friend Hamal can see ghosts, and therefore Blue can haunt him to his heart's content. But when something strange begins happening in town, Blue realizes that Hamal's ability to see the dead might actually be putting him in danger, and it's up to Blue to find a way to protect him. I haven't read this one myself, but it's been on my radar for so many years. It's so deeply beloved, especially by my fellow queer reviewers and readers who I really trust. It seems like a lovely blend of whimsy and eeriness, and I think it's definitely worth checking out. On the lighter side of things, we also have Garlic and the Vampire by Brie Paulson. This is an all-ages graphic novel about a sentient garlic clove who is happy to just tend her garden where everything is nice and safe. But when her village of vegetable folk learns that a vampire has moved into a nearby castle, they all agree for some reason that the perfect person to go confront him is none other than Garlic. Again, I've heard really great things about this. It seems very cozy and fun, especially with this village full of sentient vegetables and magic. I've heard it's very funny and whimsical, and if you enjoy it, there's also a sequel that's already out, and that one has to do with witches. Switching gears again, I wanted to mention Boys Weekend by Maddie Lubchansky. This is a queer adult graphic novel described as a hilarious trans final girl horror story. It's about an artist assistant named Sammy who's invited to an old friend's bachelor weekend on this strange hedonistic city floating out in the Atlantic Ocean. Even though Sammy hasn't identified as a man for quite some time, her old friends haven't quite gotten the memo and they're still trying to treat her like one of the guys. And she also seems to be the only one of them who's noticed a mysterious cult staying in the same hotel who are ritualistically dismembering the other guests and demanding fealty to their bloodthirsty god. I actually have an e-version of this graphic novel and I've been thinking about it for quite some time. I love trans horror stories and it's not often that we get to see them in a visual format like a graphic novel, and I think this comic is really going to explore not only what it means to exist as a trans femme person, but the unique horror of navigating friendships and relationships through transition. When it comes to dark, creepy, immersive graphic novels, I love Emily Carroll. A while back, they released a really great collection of graphic short stories called Through the Woods that was so fantastic, and now they have a new book out called A Guest in the House. This is a sort of queer horror story about Abby, who's recently gotten married to a widow dentist who she met when she arrived in town seeking a new start. Their union seems perfectly fine at first, but the more Abby learns about his first wife, the more she starts to wonder whether she actually passed away from natural causes. As she begins to question their marriage, the first wife's memory seems to become a force all its own, leaving Abby horrified, fascinated, and perhaps in love for the first time in her life. This is another one I just keep thinking about. I was actually gifted a copy recently for my birthday, although I haven't had a chance to read it yet. I just love the queer twist of falling in love with your husband's dead wife. I think that's so incredibly smart. Emily Carroll's illustrations are second to none. They have such interesting ways of paneling a story that makes you feel so immersed in what's happening on the page. If you want to read cool, creepy, dark graphic novels, their work is a great choice. Now let's talk about novellas and short fiction. I was very strict about these parameters, by the way, because I know there are shorter novels that most people could ostensibly read within a day, but I wanted to be very intentional and specific by only talking about things purposefully published as novellas or short works. First, I'm going to start with one of my favorite stories to return to on Halloween, and that is The Halloween Tree by Ray Bradbury, which is 145 pages. This is a story that takes place over the course of Halloween night about 8 friends who are going trick-or-treating together, and they plan to meet their friend Pipkin at this old haunted house. But instead of their friend, they run into the nightmarish Mr. Moundshroud, who is holding their friend hostage as Pipkin is being swept away by a dark and sinister force that's pulling him through the past. I have to admit I have a soft spot for this novella because back in the day, Cartoon Network actually made an animated adaptation of this story, and it remains one of the best Halloween movies to this day. And there's actually excerpts from the book in the animated film that are read by Ray Bradbury himself. The language, the cadence, the musicality of Ray Bradbury's writing, the cold and desolate imagery splashed across every passage is so incredibly transportative. And besides the plot itself, I love the way the story, either in written form or animated form, is really exploring all the different meanings and origins of Halloween traditions as we know them today. Going from super backlist to a new release, I think this would also be a great time to read Graveyard Shift by M.L. Rio, which is 144 pages. This is a mystery thriller thriller novella about a ragtag group of night shift workers and insomniacs who smoke a cigarette together every night at a college graveyard. But one night they come to the cemetery, which is usually completely abandoned, to find a freshly dug grave, and they begin to question who dug it, why it's there, and what or who it was meant for in the first place. If you just want a mysterious good time, I think this novella is great for that. The audiobook is read by a full cast, and it's also like a 3-hour production, so I would actually recommend that format as well. So if you just want to be entertained by a solid, vibey mystery populated with a ragtag group of weirdos, maybe check this out. Then of course we weren't going to get through this video without talking about T. Kingfisher. I would highly recommend both novellas in the Sworn Soldier series, the first of which is What Moves the Dead, which is 165 pages. This first book is a creepy, gothic reimagining of the fall of the House of Usher, following a former soldier known as Alex Easton, pronouns Ka and Khan, as Ka receives a letter saying that Khan's childhood friend, Madeline Usher, is gravely ill and also possibly dying. So Alex rushes to the ancient, decrepit Usher Manor, and what Ka finds is not only a sleepwalking Madeline speaking in strange tongues, but also a nightmare of fungal growths, disturbed wildlife, and a dark, pulsating lake. As far as Poe retellings go, this is such a great novella in that respect. It's dark, it's unsettling, it's mysterious, but as Kingfisher always does, there are also touches of unexpected humor and lightness, plus some great found family stuff as well. The story pays homage to the original, but definitely puts a really cool spin on a familiar classic. The sequel is not a retelling, it's more of a folk horror story set in an abandoned cabin in the midst of a dark, mysterious forest, but it's also really cool, and both audiobooks are read by Avi Roque, who does a fantastic job with both. I'm not formally going to recommend it here because I'm not sure if it was published as a novella or a short novel, and it's a little bit outside of the parameters of these recommendations in terms of page count, but if you want a really cool Southern Gothic twist on a haunted house story, you should also check out A House with Good Bones. A really underrated horror novella is The Scourge Between Stars by Ness Brown, which is 165 pages. This is queer sci-fi horror. It's about Jacqueline Albright, who is the acting captain aboard a rapidly failing Generation ship, and she is desperately trying to keep the last of humankind alive as they trudge back to Earth after being unable to reach their initial destination of a distant planet. Food is quickly running out, the ship is taking heavy damage that can't be repaired, and if that wasn't enough, crew members are being picked off by a horrific creature hiding somewhere in the ship. This novella is a great way to spend a few hours. It's intense, it's high octane, it has all the action and gore you could possibly hope for in a sci-fi horror story like this, and it wastes no time throwing you into the deep end and forcing you to contend with these absolutely dire stakes. Everything is going to hell from the very first page, and that sense of urgency really allows you to get behind Jack and hope against hope that she can somehow figure this out. I just think this is a really cool and again underrated story that I wish more people would read. And again, if we're talking about horror and dark twisted stories, we can't have that conversation without Stephen Graham Jones. One of his horror novellas that I would really recommend is Mapping the Interior, which is 131 pages. This is an indigenous horror story about a 15-year-old boy who thinks he sees a strange figure stepping through a doorway in his house, and this shadowy figure reminds him of his deceased father who died before his family left the reservation. And as he keeps having these encounters, he decides to eventually follow this shadow, and he learns that his house is far bigger and deeper and darker than he ever thought. This was, I think, the first thing I ever read from Stephen Graham Jones, and I still think about it. It's a deeply unsettling and decolonial take on the concept of a haunted house. It's weird, it's mind-bending, and it's very tightly paced and executed to perfection in a very short space. I know he has other novellas or short stories like The Backbone of the World and Night of the Living Mannequins, so those are also worth checking out. I actually forgot that this next book existed until I was going through my entire backlist of novellas in preparation for this video, but there's also The Grown-Up by Gillian Flynn, which is 67 pages. This is another haunted house story. It's about this person who makes a living as a psychic, except everything she does is 100% fake. One day she runs into Susan, who moved into a modern Victorian house with her family about a year ago, and she's convinced that something malevolent is haunting her home, and she hires the main character to exorcise and cleanse the house. Initially, the main character isn't too worried because she doesn't believe in the supernatural, but as soon as she steps foot in the house, she quickly begins to feel like the house is actually watching her and biding its time. I think Gillian Flynn is really great at what she does. She knows how to write and build suspense. She knows how to craft compelling characters. I haven't revisited her work in quite some time, so I don't know how much this holds up, but I think it more than fits the bill if you're looking for something short and disturbing and strange to enjoy. Next, we have The Woods All Black by Lee Mandello, which is 153 pages. This is historical Appalachian horror set in the 1920s. It's about a trans nurse named Leslie who is still, for all intents and purposes, viewed as a woman, and he finds himself stationed in a backwoods township known as Spar Creek. As soon as he gets there, he knows that something is horribly wrong with this town. Something is festering in the local congregation, and the town is rife with unrest and violence. While Leslie tries to help the townsfolk however he can, the hills surrounding the town evidently have a mind of their own, and the woods are haunted in ways that Leslie cannot possibly understand. I haven't read this one myself yet, but I think about reading it literally all the time. It has a lot of great buzzwords for me: corrupt congregation, weaponized religiosity, inexplicable mania, haunted woods. So if you're also looking for those things, this would be a great choice. Lee Mandello also has another novella that I think is more on the eco-thriller or eco-horror side of things called Feed Them Silence, which you can also check out. I also have to mention Ring Shout by P. Djeli Clark, which is 185 pages. This is historical horror set in 1915 when the birth of a nation was sweeping the US and the Klan's ranks were exponentially growing as they intended to continue spreading fear and vitriolic violence. But standing in their way is Maris and her fellow resistance fighters who hunt their hunters and send the Klan's demons back to hell. Again, I haven't read this one yet, but I feel like it's the next stop on my Year of P. Djeli Clark tour. I just love the sound of it. I love an alternate history. I love stories that infuse a bit of the supernatural into historical entities or events. And I think the commentary of resistance fighters battling against white demons is just gonna be badass. My last novella suggestion is a bit of a different flavor from the other ones because it's a horror romance, and that is Sing Me to Sleep by R.M. Virtues, which is 168 pages. This is an indie paranormal romance about Penelope, who's not only grappling with the loss of her father, but also her subsequent inability or willingness to sleep. As she continues dealing with that, she begins experiencing sleep paralysis, and she finds herself tangled up with a sleep paralysis demon known as Acheron, who might just want her back. I once again have not read this one yet, but I have really enjoyed R.M. Virtue's Gods of Hunger series, which are like erotic, modernized takes on Greek mythology, so I really trust what he can do. And if anyone can write a story about someone romancing their own sleep paralysis demon, it's R.M. Virtues. Listen, I said I was going to try to have a little something for everyone on this list, and I meant it. So those are all my short, scary, strange recommendations for graphic novels or short fiction that you can enjoy on Halloween or any other day of the year you so choose. If any other books come to mind that fit in these two categories that you think are great Halloween reads, fall reads, or end of the year reads, feel free to drop those down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself and others, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.